So you are seeing, as you're looking for houses, that a home says it's a HUD house. H-U-D, HUD. What does that mean? How is the process different? Is that something you should try to buy? Let's dive in, talk about the process and how it is different than a typical home sale. All right, so first of all, I just want to make the disclaimer that I am a licensed Tennessee real estate agent. I do not represent HUD. I am not like a special representative for them. Today, I'm talking about my experience helping buyers to purchase a home that was a HUD house. So I just want to make that disclaimer. I have not listed a HUD property. I have helped buyers to purchase. I did work alongside the listing agents, obviously, for the HUD property, but I just want to make that full out and clear that this is not as if I'm just a representative for HUD. I'm a licensed agent. I'm registered on the HUD website to represent buyers, and I want to talk to you about what that process looks like. So, that being said, the whole theme of this is you got to want the house more than you worry. More than you're a worrier, you got to be in the process to win it. And I will explain that as we go. This is not a typical process, so just keep that in mind. You have to let your ego go a little bit and think about the eye on the prize is to purchase the house. So keep that in mind as we are going over this. This is not a typical home sale. The process is a little bit different. And sometimes it may feel like, oh my gosh, is this even going to happen? And then at other times it may feel like, do they even care about me? So the goal is to buy the house. So that's the goal and the context for all this. So let's just back up for a second. What does HUD stand for? So U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, Housing and Urban Development. So a HUD home, and I'm going to read this from you exactly from the HUD's website, okay? A HUD, H-U-D home, is a 1 to 4 unit residential property acquired by HUD as a result of a foreclosure action on an FHA insured mortgage. HUD becomes the property owner and offers it for sale to recover the loss of the foreclosure claim. So essentially, it was an FHA insured mortgage, which is a type of a loan, and that property unfortunately went into foreclosure. Payments were not able to be made on the part of the person that owned it, that had the lien for the mortgage. HUD takes the house back over and then puts it for sale. Now, a lot of the times these houses might be in negative shape or bad shape, which I don't think that's not always the case. I think the connotation is a lot of these homes could be in total disrepair and they're completely horrible, and that's not necessarily the case. Stuff happens to people, unfortunately, and for whatever reason, they've got to get out of their house. They're not able to make their mortgage payment. Life happens, right? So as a result, HUD takes the property back and lists it for sale. So you find HUD properties one of two ways. If you just want to straight up only look at HUD homes, then you would go to HUDhomestore.com. So I'm going to read this from the HUD website. HUD Home Store is the listing site for HUD real estate owned single family properties. This site provides the public, brokers, state and local governments, and nonprofit organizations a centralized location to search the inventory of HUD properties for sale. In addition, registered real estate brokers and other approved organizations can place bids on behalf of their clients to purchase a HUD property. HUD Home Store also includes informative, user-friendly features providing advice and guidance for consumers on the home buying process. Okay, so a couple things to note. First of all, anybody can access the HUD Home Store. You can go right now, HUDhomestore.com. Is that correct? I have it linked here. I think it's just HUDhomestore.com. HUDhomestore.gov. And at that website, you can go and search by state. So I'm in Tennessee, click Tennessee, and you can find the property. So another thing to note is if you're on the MLS or multiple listing system, if your agent or I am your agent, am sending you properties and one of them pops up as a HUD Home Store, then you can also go to the HUD Home Store website and do some research, find out about it, see if there's any additional information. So that's the first thing, is that this website also acts as the place where you make a bid on the property. So this is where now, at first you may just see it because you're getting listings from your agent or from me. And then it'll pop up as like, it's a HUD store, a HUD house, and it'll say like selling as is. Like in the description, it's going to tell you, okay? And then under that, the listing agent is going to have a note that's like, this is where you go. You have to be registered as an agent through the HUD website in order to put a bid in. So there's some pre-work that needs to be done. So if you're wanting to use an agent, which I highly recommend, obviously like I'm a real estate agent, and that's what I do for my job, but I'm just telling you that this process is overwhelming, and also you need someone that can be your liaison between title and HUD, the listing agent, and all that, which that's what agents do anyways. That's a big part of, we are kind of like the orchestra director in the whole thing, making sure everything happens that needs to be happened, timelines are kept, etc. And something that you don't ever want to mess up in any real estate transaction is the timeline. And you certainly do not want to mess up the timeline in a HUD process, because if you mess up the timeline, you're done. It's like, you're fired. It's over. Forget about it. On to the next. HUD is like, on to the next. We don't have time for this nonsense. We got to go. We told you in the contract, we got to go. So my suggestion is to use an agent unless you are just very savvy. Maybe you used to be an agent. I don't know. My suggestion is use an agent, just because for me, like, I would be overwhelmed if I had to like figure this out all on myself. If I had not ever done anything in real estate before. So just want to make that disclaimer. Obviously you can do whatever you want. But I would think, have someone who knows what they're doing, you trust, that you can ask questions to, that's going to get stuff done. Okay. So that's the first disclaimer. Second disclaimer is, once your agent or whoever you're using has registered, hopefully they are already registered with the HUD site. If you decide you want to make an offer, it's not typical. So if you were just buying a normal house, you would just put in what we call a purchase and sale agreement. And on that purchase and sale agreement, we say like what's staying with the house. We say the offer amount, the type of loan, how much earnest money is there, how long is the inspection period, are you going to ask for repairs, whose names go on the deed, what's the closing date, are there any special stipulations like you have a home sale, anything like that, right? So that goes on a typical purchase and sale offer. So you say all that information up front, and then you go back and forth with the seller, you negotiate, you get under contract, and you work the timeline. You work the steps to close. Versus for HUD, what you do is you go on their website, you find the house, and you put a bid, what they call a bid, in on the house. And in that bid, you say how much you're offering, the type of buyer you are, which I'm going to talk about in a second. You say who your title company is. You say who your agent is, who their brokerage is. You also need your pre-approval letter, which you should have anyways. If you are currently looking at real estate in the East Tennessee area, listen, you got to be pre-approved or no one's going to take you seriously. They're going to be like, show me the money, whether that's a pre-approval or a bank statement. You got to have proof of funds. Otherwise, you're not going to be taken seriously. And HUD Home Store is going to be like, you can't buy this. Where's your pre-approval, bro? So for your bid, you say the amount, the type of buyer you are, who your title is, which that's important. You want a strong title company, a title company that's done it before. And that's another reason why it's good to have an agent, because an agent is going to know who can actually get this closed for you. It's one thing to get under contract. It's another thing to get closed. Like all this nonsense when we see posts about we're under contract. No, that's great. Let's get closed. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, that's just a whole other story. Whole other soapbox. So you put your bid in, you say how much you're offering, the type of buyer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You give your pre-approval. My suggestion is on this pre-approval that those same names on the pre-approval are the same names you put as buyers on this bid. So have your ish together first. You can potentially change a name later. Well, why would I need to change a name? Well, say for example, someone is helping you with the loan. Maybe they're not going to actually go on the deed. Maybe they're not even going to live in the house. But if they are on that pre-approval, my suggestion is go ahead and have them listed as a buyer when you put the bid in. Because sometimes, depending on the type of purchaser they are, like if they're going to be living in the house and you add them after the fact, you will have to start over in the process, which is not good because HUD will put the home back for sale. Or if they have another bid that said that yes, we could be used as a backup, then they're going to accept that bid before you can resubmit your new bid with the correct buyer name. So my suggestion to you is make sure whoever needs to be on that buyer name, whoever's name are listed on the pre-approval, go ahead and put them as a buyer. This is normally not such a big deal, but I would just be very aware that depending on the type of borrower they are, if it's going to be an owner occupant or buyer occupant, they need to be on there from the beginning. In my case, we were able to add a buyer onto the pre-approval and onto the contract simply because that person was not going to be living in the property. It's a whole story, but it worked out. In previous deals, it's not been the case. I had an agent tell me that, you know, they tried to add someone, and again, like I said, they kicked out the contract and they ended up losing the house because HUD had a backup offer. So when you actually submit your bid, you can tell HUD use this as a backup. So say they don't take your bid, maybe they like it, maybe they just want to keep it in line in case something falls through, because as we know, 21% of deals fall through, at least for the 2023 year so far in East Tennessee. So basically HUD is like, well, maybe this isn't the best offer, we have something else on the table, but we're going to keep this offer in case that one falls through. So bear in mind that you want to submit what you need to submit on the front end. You got to have your ducks in a row. Do not freak out. I'm just telling you, do your best to have everything in order when you put this bid in, okay? You put the bid in, and then you wait. And then, out of nowhere, you get an email. Bid acceptance. And this is when you got to be boom, 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 on it. Because in that, when you get the email that says bid acceptance, your agent will get an email that says bid acceptance. And in that email, it's going to say, send us the money, send us the earnest money. It's going to tell you how much earnest money. So this is different. In a normal purchase and sale, in a normal transaction, the buyer says how much earnest money they are going to submit. Now, in rare cases, a seller is going to counter you or demand a certain amount of earnest money based on the contract, based on different things. So, but in almost nearly all transactions, the buyer says my earnest money is going to be $500 or $1,000. Guidance would say 1 to 3%, okay, of the purchase price. Well, in this case, HUD tells you, hey, send us $2,000. It needs to be in a cashier's check or a money order. They're going to tell you exactly how to do the money, whether it should be a personal check, which they're not going to take a personal check. You know, they're going to tell you exactly what to do. And what happens is that money gets held at title. However, the listing agent, in my experience, gets the check and takes it to title. So they have a very specific process for how this works. And you also have a very specific timeline within which to turn in your earnest money. Okay. So that's another reason, again, why you want to have an agent working with you, because they can help you organize all this. Where does it need to go? Who does it need to go to? And when does it need to get there? So this is also different because in a typical normal purchase and sell agreement where you're not buying a HUD house, as the buyer, you do not write an earnest money check until once you're under contract. So in this case, we've gotten our bid accepted. HUD wants the earnest money. And once the earnest money has been verified, then you get your contract. Now, let's talk about this earnest money for a second. Do you get this back? Well, again, this is another key difference. Depending on your purchase and sale agreement on a typical non-HUD house, depending on how the contract is, you could get your earnest money back due to inspections, there's all kinds of different reasons, right? However, HUD dictates depending on what type of buyer you are. So you might see on a HUD home listing that only owner occupants can purchase a house or get under contract within the first 30 days of this house being listed for sale. So they're only going to take offers from people who are going to live in the house upon buying it. Now, I'm pointing that out because there's also an investor option. So, for example, my clients were buying this home. They eventually will move into it in a couple years, but they want to retire here to Tennessee. They found this house. It just totally was like magical. It worked out. And it's in an area that they want to retire to. However, they currently live in a different state. So, we had to list them as investors. And apparently, the previous contract, those people had lied about it, and then HUD found out. That's how my people were able to get it, because it got put back on market. But that time, that 30 days still has to go by before HUD will accept a contract for investors. Now, again, this is specific to transaction. This is specific to each house. So again, this is why you want to be working with someone who knows to look for the details, knows what questions to ask, and then also what type of buyer you are, because that's not something you're gonna be able to change on the contract. And again, you could lose the house over it, okay? So don't worry about the connotation of being an investor. It doesn't matter. For the purposes of what HUD needs, either you're going to immediately move into that house when you buy it, or you're not. And these people, they have another house in a different state. So even though they're not investors, they're not gonna be like renting it or whatever, it was still a second home for them, and therefore they fall into the line of investor. Here's why that matters. Because that earnest money becomes non-refundable, period. Doesn't matter what the inspection says. Doesn't matter. It is non-refundable. It is now HUD's dollars. Like, HUD is gonna get that earnest money, okay? So that is very different than a typical purchase and sell process where you would get that earnest money back, right? Because you are within contract, something happened with an inspection, the roof is falling in. You can't buy it because the roof is falling in. You get your earnest money back, right? And in this case, not that I'm saying the house you're buying that the roof is falling in on the HUD home. I'm just telling you that pretty much that earnest money is theirs, okay? Now, even if you are an owner occupant, on your contract will say certain reasons why you can and may get earnest money back, okay? There is also on that contract an inspection period stipulation. And in that contract, for example, ours said 15 days. So we had 15 days if my people had been owner occupants. But because they were not, we could schedule inspections pretty much within our time in order to reach our closing date period. Okay, so there's a little bit of difference depending on what type of buyer you are. If you are that owner occupant, you've got 15 days or whatever your contract says in order to get all of your inspections done, okay? If you are on the investor side, you got to get your inspections done if you are wanting to do them before closing, and you have a certain window to close. So that's another way that's different. So essentially what has happened now is you found this HUD home, you've gotten your bid accepted, you've submitted your earnest money. Now, once you've done that on time, now you get your contract. And on your contract, it's going to stipulate the purchase price, how much earnest money you paid, your timelines, how many days you have to close, and then what things to do and get done. So for example, a HUD house is most likely going to have been winterized. Well, let's think about that. If it's been winterized, the water's been turned off, the utilities have been turned off, like you cannot use it, right? So HUD will turn off the utilities and then also winterize the property. Well, in order to have a home inspection, it cannot be winterized and the utilities have to be on, right? But also in your contract, it's gonna say you have 72 hours to have the power turned on for inspections. So, hang with me. You have to get the utilities on. You have to get a plumber to come de-winterize it. You've got to get the inspector to come and inspect it within a 72-hour window before the power gets turned back off. Okay, so this is not normal. This is probably the biggest difference when it comes to the whole purchase and sale process of a HUD home, because yes, on a typical purchase, we have a contract. We have a contract timeline that says you've got 7 days to do your inspections. You've got 10 days to do your inspections, whatever that contract says. But the power's already on. It's not been winterized in most cases. In 99.999999% of purchases, the home has not been, the utilities are on, and it's not been winterized, okay? So now, depending on where the house is and what HUD determines, you may also have to have it, you may also have to have it re-winterized. Now, we were lucky, we did not have to do that. We did not have to have it re-winterized. We just had to have the utilities cut back off. So that was great. Now, this is the other thing I want to tell you. HUD is not paying for any of this. You are responsible as the buyer to put the cost to have it de-winterized and obviously inspected, like you're going to pay for the cost of your home inspection. But those costs of getting the utilities turned on, all those costs are yours. HUD is not paying for those. So normally you would pay for your home inspection, but again, you're not paying for the winterizing, de-winterizing, whatever. So just know that that is another difference when it comes to purchasing a HUD house. Now, if you're like, oh, this is overwhelming, it's okay. You just have to work the steps and kind of know like what you're getting into. This is not to discourage you, like this is way complicated. This is kind of give you an idea. This is how this is different. It is possible, and that's why it's important to work with someone that can help you and guide you through the process, because otherwise you're going to be like, oh my gosh, blah. You know what I mean? Which you may be like that anyways. If you're naturally already like, ugh, then get some help, okay? You know what I'm saying? Anyways, okay, so far, bid accepted, earnest money submitted. We have our contract. In the contract, it says you have X number of days to close from this acceptance. And that is different than a purchase and sale agreement on a typical buy. Because on a typical home purchase, that purchase and sale agreement, we have a closing date that we're working towards, which is kind of the same thing, but HUD says you have X number of days to get it closed. In our case, they said you have 45 days from the day that this contract is executed in order to close, right? So then, in my case, we weren't working like with a 15-day window to get inspections done, or a 15-day window in order to, identify any structural issues or whatever that might have been caused for a buyer to back out. Now, if there's some sort of major structural issue or whatever that's found within that home inspection period, if you are an owner occupant and HUD agrees with your claim, that case, you can get out of it and get your earnest money back, okay? But again, this is all subject to every different transaction. Every transaction is different. Every situation is different. Transactions are just like people. They're all different. You know what I mean? They're all the same, but they're all different, you know? Anyways, back to my teaching days. Like all my kiddos, they were all, freshmen in high school or whatever, but they all had their own little special personalities. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, okay, moving on. So, 15 days. In this case, read your contract. Your contract's going to tell you, your agent's going to help you, but you have X number of days to get everything done. In our case, we were more worried about working towards a closing date because my people were already going to be in town. And so we were trying to get everything done in order to work to a closing date. Now, in the background of all this happening, of the inspection process, the de-winterization, all of that, in the background of all that, the title company and the your lender are working to get everything done, right? So you're still going through the normal like underwriting process. You're still getting all your forms and everything together with your lender in order for the lender to close on the loan, right? So that's the person who you did the pre-approval with, all of that. So that's all happening in the background, which is what's going on anyways in a typical purchase and sale of a like typical non-HUD house. So that's kind of going on in the background. The other thing that I want to mention is that HUD has asset managers, and those asset managers kind of act as a liaison between your buyer's agent, the listing agent, and HUD. So they are the person that you almost answer to in a sense when you have questions. You go to this asset manager, and that asset manager runs the show. They take care of everything. They are the ones that if any amendments need to be made, they've got specific forms for what those are. You go through them with all questions, and they make sure that they're kind of like a vendor for HUD, because HUD is a department, a U.S. department, like it's a U.S. government agency. So they have asset managers. I just logged me out. That's how long I've been talking. Anyways, they have asset managers, and I just mentioned that because that's also going to be someone that your agent is going to deal with specifically when they have questions or whatever about any process, anything in the actual transaction. Okay, so bid accepted, earnest money submitted, you got your contract, you signed your contract, you did your inspections, you are ready to move forward. And at this place, you are now at the point where you're trying to work towards a closing date. This is where you want to send an email to your title company, to your lender, and make sure all are on the same page. Because in a typical purchase and sale of a non-HUD house, you as the buyer, as the borrower, if you are getting a loan, you have a document called a closing disclosure. And that closing disclosure it's a federal law, must be opened 3 days prior to close, opened and signed, okay? HUD is a little bit different. They want 7 days with that closing disclosure. Now, this is why everyone's got to be working towards the same goal, towards the same closing date. So, for example, my people wanted a very specific date. We knew this, I think, about 10 days ahead of time. Like, this is the date we wanted because we were coming up on a holiday weekend. The power's obviously off. They were going to be here for 2 weeks. They were going to move in within a couple of days. Well, if we didn't close on this date, the power was going to be off for another 5 days due to how the holiday fell on the weekend. And they had to get to the place by noon, whatever, was the whole thing, right? So that being said, we knew far in advance we're working towards this closing date. And once we know that, that's when we want title working specifically with the person at HUD, and that's when we want the lender also on the same page. So now we've done all the inspection side of it, and now we're working to close. And we just want to make sure that whatever HUD says, hey HUD, and title will work with this. But title will ask HUD, what's your final deadline for the documents? And they're going to say 7 days, just as an example, which is what for ours was as an example. So that means the lender also needs to have their package at that time as well, so it can go through with HUD. So that being said, there may or may not be some flexibility depending on specific situations, specific buyer. And then also note an appraisal does happen. And this again is different because on your contract for HUD, it's going to stipulate what happens if the home does not appraise. Our contract says if the home does not appraise, the buyer is responsible for the difference. That is not the same as a normal purchase and sale. A normal purchase and sale, you have 3 days to decide what you're going to do, which could be you back out, which could mean you decide to pay the difference, which could mean you can negotiate with the sellers. You have options. That is not the case, for example, on our contract. Now, this could be different. I don't think it is different, but I'm just telling you, read your contract so you know what's going on, what to look forward to. Yeah, what to look forward to and how to work it. But all of that is in your contract. And again, it varies very differently than a typical purchase and sale. I know I've said that 15 million times. And at the beginning of this video, I pointed out the fact that this is not a normal purchase. And it can be hard sometimes when you feel like I'm buying this house and I'm spending all this money. I'm spending all the monies on this home. It is an investment and it feels very scary. And you also feel pretty vulnerable, right? Because you're putting all these dollars out and you want to get a good product, something that you think is worth it for your money, right? So that's why I said at the beginning, if your goal is to purchase the home, all of the rest of this can be figured out. However, if you are already thinking you're overspending, if you're already thinking I want to do it my way, if you're already thinking well, why don't they repair this? If you're already thinking why do I have to turn the utilities on or whatever, you got to let all that go. Because ego and all of that, all those worries are not going to help to get you to the finish line. We have to work the steps. Just like any purchase of a home, we got to work the steps. The goal is to get the house as your home. And if we start looking at nitpicking, and any deal this is the case, but especially in the purchase of a HUD home, if you start nitpicking, you lost sight of what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is buy the house. And if you find yourself thinking, oh, I've overpaid, that's different. Then maybe you need to walk away and take it as a loss of the earnest money or whatever. But if the goal is to actually buy the house, you just got to work the steps and it will work itself out. So just remember that it's a very different process. You definitely want help and support in the process. It is totally doable. But also know that it's going to feel a little bit like, I just gotta suck it up. They don't care. Because remember that something could go wrong. They could have a backup in the wings waiting and you could not get the house, right? So the goal is to get the house, and that's the main point. Everything else, fixable. But if you're just thinking, why don't they don't care about me? I'm not saying that the Department of Housing and Urban Development doesn't care about you. I'm just saying, like, they got other people in line, you know? So they're very much like, we don't need you. If you buy it, great. If not, we'll find someone else, you know? So just keep that in mind in the process. It is totally possible. It is totally doable, but it is obviously very different than a typical purchase of a non-HUD home. So that being said, I hope this has been helpful for you. Obviously, feel free to reach out to me directly. The best way to get in touch with me is to call me on my cell phone or text me 865-242-9821. And that being said, if you like more content about purchasing homes in the East Tennessee area, please click subscribe. And I'll see you on the next video.